So, for instance, if they have 15% equity.
Good morning, Adrian and Rachel. We're going to get started here in a moment. Ed Duncan is going to be our speaker.
If they pay off their current fee, they become eligible again, whoever the veteran is.
Questions?
Their eligibility is restored and they can use it for.
I don't mean to interrupt. I don't know if anybody can hear me, but we can't hear anything online.
I'm sorry, guys.
Sorry, guy. I haven't said anything important.
Thank you.
So I want you guys to get in the habit of asking questions to the person you're talking to determine, if you don't mind, do we have a crayon here somewhere? To determine whether or not they're worthy of your time. Self-employment, when you hear that word, the very first question you ask is, how long have you been self-employed? Because to buy a home, under our current system, we need 2 years worth of tax returns. So if they said, oh, I just started my business 8 months ago, I'm sorry. Then your follow-up question is there another borrower in your family? Are you married? Oh, yeah, my wife works for the federal government and has for 25 years. Oh, bingo, we might have something. No, it's my wife and myself. That's not a borrower yet, maybe down the road. You can take their name, get their information. But right now, that's not a borrower because you need 2 years worth of tax returns from their business, proving their income. That'd be personal returns and business returns. Okay? 2 years, keep that in your head. Now, secondly, self-employed. Most self-employed borrowers do what their accountant tells them, as they should, and write off all their income. My classic example is that a very good friend of mine who's a decorator, very successful decorator, 30 years in the business, makes a ton of money. His cash flow is probably $300,000 a year. If you look at bank statements going in and out of his bank, what he reports on his income taxes is significantly less, about 70, because he writes off everything. And you guys are self-employed, and you're going to write off all the gasoline that you drive, for your car, all those things. So you tell the government you make $40,000. As a lender, we believe what you told the government. So if you're telling the government you made 40K, guess what number I use? Yeah, how much house does $40,000 buy? Not very much. Not so good. So the self-employment thing is a trap, and you have to be very careful. I have had clients, Deb and I did a client together, and when we started, he was self-employed. He had never bought a home in 15 years or whatever it was because he didn't have any money and was afraid that his credit wasn't good enough. Well, it turns out he didn't have any credit. He was a ghost. He paid cash for everything for his entire life. We run into that. We call them ghosts. And that's fine. That's fine. So we built credit for him. He established credit. I told him to go get a Lowe's card and get a Home Depot card. Anyway, so we built credit for him, and a year and a half later, he bought his first home. And as he laid it, he was also self-employed, said. So I told him, you have to show some. Was showing about $40,000 on his income tax returns. So I said, okay, next year we need to show a lot. So the next year he showed like $95,000, which is really what he made. So we took the average. What we do is average 2 years. That's why we need 2. We took an average. It was sufficient to buy a home. He did 100% financing, ready to go. So you can turn those people into clients, but I want you to be aware of who you're talking to. Listen for what they're telling you. Ask a ton of questions about what they do for a living. In your mind, you have to be a skeptic. You have to be a hopeful, optimistic skeptic. That is this person realtor worthy? Or is that person standing over there the person I should be talking to? Does that make sense to you? Now, you can get their information, put them in your database, you can sit down with them, but what you have to sell as a real estate agent isn't homes. What you have to sell as a real estate agent is your time. Your time is worth a lot. It's a little chunk that you pull off the shelf. I have 7 hours during this day to sell. What's your time worth? Well, as a professional realtor, I would argue your time is worth $500 to $800 an hour. So if you spend 2.5 hours with somebody that's getting you nowhere, you just took a $1,000 bill, tossed it out the window. You're selling yourself and your time. Real estate is simply a means to get there, to do that. You're like an attorney. An attorney sells advice, but they sell it on a time basis, right? Same thing with a lot of accountants. They do that now. So keep that in mind when you're having a real estate conversation. The idea is if everything sort of lines up in your questions, maybe a salary borrower, maybe 2 people, maybe you have a gift. It's okay to ask those questions because this is, again, it's your time we're talking about. It's your money that we're spending here. Yeah, well, you know, you salary borrower, blah, blah, blah. Just got my, you know, new job, blah, blah, blah. Do you have money for a down payment saved? It's okay to ask that question. I'm going to ask them. Yeah, I do. Oh, that's fantastic. Is that all your money or a gift? You don't have to know how much. Oh, well, my mom and dad are going to help us with a gift. Most first-time home buyers start with a gift. Both of my sons, I gifted them money for their house, for their down payment. Not for the house, but for their down payment. Most people do. Ask those questions. It's perfectly okay. In fact, they will think more of you because you ask those questions rather than get their name and their address and their email and say, my lender will call you. Okay? Most times that doesn't work. Unless they're a really highly motivated client, which is, it happens, but it's about 1 in 10. You're much better off asking some questions, and that's called pre-qualification. You're pre-qualifying them in your head so that when you call the lender at Highlands and you say, hey, this borrower is this, 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 and this, and they're getting money from a gift from their family. Okay, that's a gigantic step forward for us because then we can continue your conversation with them. You follow me? And we may have a client at the end. That it's a difficult step to qualify them, to ask the questions, and get them to talk to a lender. They don't want to talk to me. I guess I always kind of equate it to they know that I'm going to run their credit. They know to look at their finances. And a lot of people don't like to reveal that to somebody they don't know. That's why I much prefer, I'm old school, to sit with them in here with you on a Saturday. We all sit together, have a nice conversation. You talk to them for 20 minutes or so. And by the way, this is Ed, my lender, and which is named my website, coincidentally, edmylender.com. Anyway, that way it's a soft introduction. I've sat with them for a few minutes. I can start asking them questions. Now, I will always say to the borrower, I am going to proceed. Are you okay with Dennis sitting in? 99 out of 100 times the borrower is going to say, yeah, I don't mind. At that point, I leave it to the realtor, whether you're comfortable with their financial information or not. Most realtors say, no, I'll let you guys talk. I have to look at some properties, whatever. But I leave that entirely up to you and your client and the comfort level. But we always ask the client's permission first. We show them some respect. That's the hardest step, is to get them on your territory. Don't meet them in a coffee shop. Do not meet them at their house. Oh my gosh, never ever do that unless it's a listing appointment. Meet them on your turf. Here. Get an office. Sit down with them. You have everything at your disposal, all your tools. Does your attorney meet you at your coffee table? Nope. Why are you different? You're going to make as much money as they are. That's the respect for the realtor. Have respect for yourself. Say, I am going to meet you at my office. By the way, when you set an appointment, never give more than 2 choices. I have 2 appointments available, Tuesday at 2 or Wednesday at 1. Which one works for you? Learn to not talk. Next person who talks loses. Okay? Which is true. In sales, when you ask a closing question, that's a closing question. Which appointment works for you? If you meet them during business hours, that shows business. This is business. Okay? Show some professionalism. This is a business transaction. Saturdays are fine. 8 o'clock Tuesday night is not good. That's not professional. It's okay. People take lunch hours. People take days off. And if they're buying a house and going to spend $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 on a home, and they can't afford to take an hour and a half to come in here and talk to you, is that a client? See, I question whether or not they are taking it as seriously as you are. You're taking it seriously, but they're not, because they can't take an hour and a half off. People take lunch hours. People can do a long lunch hour. They can take off the morning or the afternoon and sit down and talk to you about a serious matter of spending $500,000 on a home. Keep professional across the board. Okay? Have respect for yourself and ask a bunch of questions. That's point number one. Point number two. Does anybody know the difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval? This seems like such an elementary question. Go ahead. What's that?
When you pre-approved, that's the real deal, when the lender actually knows the numbers if you are eligible to actually.
Wow, she should get a coffee card. Deb! A pre-approval, that's exactly. On a pre-qualification, a borrower has filled out an application with what they do for a living and how much money they make, how much money is in a bank account. And I look at it and run credit, and I say, my overview here is, they seemed like they can buy. That's a pre-qualification. A pre-approval means I have seen some written verification thereof. Now, what I ask for is tax returns. Last 2 years, I ask for documents that can't change. I want to see your 2015, 2016 tax returns. That guarantees me what they're telling me is the truth. And quite often, I'll ask for a bank account. Where's the money coming from? Oh, well, I have the money in a savings account. Oh, can I see a copy of that? The last statement, the last 30-day statement. Okay, at that point, I have income, I have assets, I have credit, and I verified it, so I'm ready to go. During the process, the reason this is important and really important is, and by the way, different loan officers have a different take on this. This is the true definition, just what you just said. During the process, and I just did this with, I can mention his name, Drew Swirsky. And we have a VA client buying a house, competing offers on the house. It's a $700,000 house. And these people so deserve a house. 3 kids living in a 3-bedroom townhouse with 2 baths. Can't even imagine. And the oldest kid's in high school. So, and we're super nice folks, very well qualified. During the process, Drew said, hey, here's a listing agent's information. Now, Drew and I have worked together on many transactions, so I know what I wanted to call the listing agent before the contract went in. So I called the listing agent and said, I am working with Mr. Swirsky. Oh, yeah, I know Drew, blah, blah, blah. And she said, I don't have a contract yet. And I said, well, you're going to have one. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about my borrower before we begin. Well, she said, well, I have another contract. And I said, I do now. And I said, here's the strengths of our file. So I sold the listing agent on the strengths of my veteran. The other contract was 20% down conventional financing. We were 0 down VA. Now, if you're the listing agent, which one would you normally take? 20% down, right? She did reveal to me that she was a pretty new agent. Love working with new agents on listings. She kind of spilled the beans a little bit. She said financially, which told me that sale price, offer price on Drew's was better than the other one. And you can get away with that because you got 20% down, so you can come in a little lighter on sale price. She said and after the whole description, I said, well, tell me about your seller. I am more than happy as a loan officer to talk to your seller to give them comfort as to of strength of this contract. And sometimes we'll get that. I'll make that phone call. Sometimes the seller will call me, which is fine. I don't mind talking to sellers because I'm selling the contract. I'm selling my borrower and I'm selling the real estate agent. I want you guys to do the transaction together. She's kind of spilled. She says, well, my seller's ex-military. Bing. You just spilled the beans. And I said, tell your seller, thank you for their service. Number one. Number two, as a veteran, You understand the challenges of a veteran with a large family and preservation of capital. I said they're coming from a small townhouse. They have money, in savings and IRAs. They want to, preserve as much funds as possible so that when they move in their house, they can decorate with new drapes. And, I just went down that path. Drew ratified the contract an hour later. It worked. She did ask me, have you pre-approved them? And I said, oh yeah, I got their tax returns, and I did. And I said, I have their assets. I know, how much money they make, the whole thing. I said, we are ready to go, and we'll close in 3 weeks. VA, we'll close in 3 weeks. And I've already got them pre-approved. If the other loan officer on the other transaction had bothered to call the listing agent, they may have been able to push me to the side because of sheer cash. But they didn't bother to make that phone call. So ask your lender when you're in a contract, and going forward, by the way, in the springtime, there's no inventory out there. I guess you guys already know that's part of your business, right? There's no inventory out there. So you're going to be competing with other contracts on every single deal. Just assume there's 2 other contracts that are better than you. So call in the federales, baby. Bring in anybody you can. Have your lender call the listing agent to try to get your contract to look better than others. It's not always going to work, but it is definitely a positive step. And I know in that case, in that transaction, that wouldn't have happened if the other lender had called. Because, the listing agent, again, a new agent, and she actually called me back that afternoon to ask me a couple other questions. So I knew, okay, when I get a call back, again, you're taking your hand completely at that point. Listen to what they're telling you. When you ask a closing question, shut up. Most realtors talk too much. Most realtors talk too much. Just stop talking and listen to what they're telling you. They're going to tell you a lot. Okay? That was point number 2. Number 3, my little handout. This goes out to every single borrower I have the privilege of working with on my very first or second email correspondence with them. What to expect. Because during the loan process, now we have changed our system, so there are borrowers who are updated all the time. Anytime there's a significant landmark, appraisal's been ordered, appraisal's been brought in, loan is in processing, loan is underwriting, they get a little email from our company with a cute little video attached. It's actually kind of good. It's like 1.5 minutes that tells them where they are in the process. But I give this out from at the beginning to the real estate agents and I'll send it to the listing agent and to the borrowers, because I'm going to make references as I proceed with them. Your loan is in processing. Now, the borrower is overwhelmed. I get it. They're moving a family, they're boxing stuff, they're freaked out about a contract, they're freaked out about financing, all the freak out things. But they can just look on this, and I will reference this little sheet. Oh, my loan's in process. They can look down to see what does that mean. That's a new term. They don't know what it means. You guys probably don't know what it means. So I send this out just as a way to soften the blows and to tell them, and I tell borrowers, you're going to love me at the beginning. Tim Pearson does this with his listing thing too. You're going to love me at the beginning. You're going to hate me at the 3/4 of the way through. Why? Because I want page 4 of that bank statement that you did not bother to send me. And I need a new pay stub. So they don't like to send documents. So we try to be as complete as possible. Okay? But if you look at this, when the loan goes into underwriting, the underwriter is going to rip the loan to shreds. They're going to put it under a microscope. Because their job is to find a way to make the loan work, but to cover every single possible question. Okay? And yes, it's a horrible, hideous process on the borrower side. But We don't ask the questions out of being mean. We ask them because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac require us to ask those questions. The only time in the process, Deb and I were talking about this earlier, the only time in the process where I will ask the real estate agent, hey man, can you help me? I've asked for the divorce decree 4 times and the borrower won't send it to me. By the way, why would I need a divorce decree? Anybody. Because divorce decrees include payments for like alimony, which the borrower may be paying or receiving. If they're paying, some alimony payments are pretty hefty. That's a monthly debt. That could be bigger than any car payment they have. That can knock them out of qualifying for a home because they are not going to tell you that in your discussion at the Super Bowl party that they have an alimony payment of $1,500 a month and they only make $5,000 a month. Now we're down to $3,500 a month, right? Gross. We just changed the whole dynamic of what they can buy. So the divorce decree tells me that kind of information. And there's a block they have to check, divorced. So if I see that, I'm going to ask for that divorce decree. You guys don't really need to know about that. And I don't bother to tell you, which leads me to what do you want to know? What you want to know from a transactional standpoint of where it's going and what's happening is entirely up to you. And I've said this many times, I've got people who give me every minutia. It's fine. Don't mind that. Just tell me what you want, and I'll do that for you. I'll go into depth on every loan and tell you exactly where I am and give you all the information and updates every inch of the way. Or you'd be like my wife, yes or no? That's the extent of the question. Is it closing or not? Yeah, it'll be fine. Okay, that's all she wants to know. If they're not giving me the divorce degree or the bank statement or whatever it is that I'm asking for, I'm going to bring you in and say, hey, Dennis, I'm picking on you, you're the only guy in here. Yeah. Besides this gentleman over here. I don't know his name or I'd be picking on him. I'm sorry, what's your name? Nice. I have met Dennis before, and I think it's the first time I've ever met you, right? Oh, well, let me shake your hand then. A pleasure. Thank you for coming. I'm going to bring you in to say, hey, Dennis, I'm not getting this document, and the ramifications are it's not going to close on time. That's the word you don't want to hear, right? Because you have your car payment coming. And to make your car payment, this loan to close, you need this house to close, right? That's the whole point here. So I'm going to say, hey, you have a stronger bond with this client than I do because you've spent time with them in your automobile, driving them all around Northern Virginia houses, right? You've got a strong bond with them. So you, in your very soft, gentle way, are going to say, hey, borrower, have you gotten, however you want to phrase it, the way Drew does it, and I love Drew, we're very good friends. Drew says, have you given everything to Ed that he's asked for? Drew already knows the answer to that question. He's an attorney, right? Attorneys never ask a question they don't know the answer to. Yeah, well, I might have, well, what is it that he needs? Oh, well, he needs, can you get it to him today? That's the way he'll put it. We can't proceed without it. Because those are like an uncomfortable conversation. I've already had that conversation with them. And they're delaying for whatever reasons. They may have completely legitimate delay, maybe family issue, who knows? I'm not saying that they're not legitimate. I'm saying my job is to get this thing to close on time so everybody's happy, and I need this document to move forward. Okay? So quite often, occasionally, we will bring you guys in to help us, and it's because we need your assistance. You have this strong bond with them. I've got a bond with them. Maybe I've met with them for half an hour, 45 minutes, plus a bunch of emails and a couple of phone conversations. You guys have a huge, strong bond with your borrower. At the end, the borrower's going to hug you. You know, we don't even get a handshake in that deal. Just kidding, because most of them are very good. But, you know, we just don't have that connection. and you do. And so we're going to ask you for help. Okay? That was my 35 minutes. But I want to ask you, as new realtors, what questions, and you don't have to say it now, but if you have a question, I'm happy to help. Anything that you have a question about, walk in and ask us. That's why we're here. There's 3 of us here. We're over here in, we call it Siberia. And if you've ever been in there like this morning, it was about 36 degrees in there. But we do have heaters now. And across the way, of course. So you can walk in our office and ask us. We love that. We live for that. Just to come in, or come in and sit down and let's have a cup of coffee together. You know, we don't have to talk about real estate. You can talk about anything you want. I just had coffee with, we didn't have coffee, but I just sat down with Dennis. Yeah, and he had questions about the secondary market. Is what, you know, when they sell loans on the other side, what's that about? He had a lot of really good questions. It was fun to talk about. But please come to us with specifics and come to us with general questions because we like that. She came to me the other day and asked me about what visas, right? Yeah. If you have a client who's here on a visa, the very first question I have, what type of visa? Ask your client. When you're having the conversation at the Super Bowl party, you're on a visa, really? What visa is it? You can ask it in a gentle fashion. They'll know. They'll know. If they're on a 6-month renewable, it's pretty tough to get them a loan. If they're on a 2-year renewable, yeah, we can generally work with that. What Fannie and Freddie want to see is 2 years in the country. They don't want to see that their borrower's going back in a year. You know, that's hard to sell to Fannie and Freddie. It's probably not going to work because there are certain visas that just like any other citizen that you can get them a loan for. But we have to know specifically what visa they have. Again, that's part of the questions process. Ask a bunch of questions. They will love you if you ask questions too, by the way. What do people want to talk about? Themselves. Right? Are they interested in you? Not so much. But they love to talk about themselves. So the more you communicate with themselves, they don't care, by the way, that you've never sold a piece of real estate. They don't know that, and they don't care. They care about themselves. Don't worry they're going to ask you a question that you can't answer, because, yeah, that's going to happen. Well, this group of townhouses over in Springfield, I understand they have high HOA fee. Do you know why? No. Are you interested in those towns? Why are you asking me that question? You can say, I don't know the answer to that. I'll find out. Why do you have an interest in that group of townhouses? They've got a whole laundry list of reasons why they're interested in that group of townhouses. You just haven't got to the answer yet. But you might have a client there. If they're down to property specific, you might have a client. Okay? You can always assume they're a client with the start of the conversation, but always have your radar up for what do you do? Where's the money coming from? There's a gentleman who used to work with Steve Gaskins. I don't know, never met him, but I've heard Steve tell the story many times, and I love Steve. He's the best. And this guy, when he met somebody at an open house, he'd look him right in the eye and says, "His name is Charlie. Charlie, how do you intend to buy this house?" Well, you're putting him on the spot. You know? But Charlie wasn't going to spend time with them unless they could afford to buy the house. Because Charlie was making $500 an hour, and he wants to get his money's worth out of this. He wants to make sure it's worth they're realtor worthy. Now, I don't suggest that strategy quite that way unless you can get away with it. But it's a legitimate question. Do a ton of open houses. Go where the people are. If you can find an open house between $400 and $500, or between now and $400 to $600,000, that is the sweet spot. Those are because a lot of people can afford a $400,000 or $500,000 house. We don't need a ton of income to do that. You're going to get people walking in the door. Everybody that walks in that door, even neighbors has a reason to walk in the door. be looking for a house, maybe looking to sell their house. The neighbor may be thinking that house is identical to mine. Let's see what theirs looks like because they're wanting 500. See what I can get from mine. They've got a reason for it, and they're going to brush you off. But the more of those you do, the better you get. Leslie Hutchinson is one of the best open house people I've ever seen. She is fantastic at that. The way she holds open houses, questions she asks. We can get her to do it. A seminar. She is really, really something at that. But the more you do, the better you get at those things. So I strongly suggest that you do that because what does Steve say? If you do 10 open houses, you'll end up with one borrower. That's pretty good odds, really. Yeah. If you're cold calling, how many phone calls are you going to make? Hundreds. Do open houses if you possibly can. Okay. Any questions for you guys? Nothing? I could try to get a smile out of her.
She's still asleep. She had a very long weekend. She drove to and from Florida.
You drove back from Florida yesterday?
Well, she drove down on Thursday. Round trip to Florida is a weekend.
In the rain?
Well, we split the drive. We didn't
So
drive
that's
the
a long
whole
time
time
in the car.
yesterday. Yeah, no, I drove till like almost 1 a.m.
Ugh.
Friday night because I was like, let's pull over. I go, no, it's gonna rain all day tomorrow. It's gonna be horrible. So.
Yeah.
And so you were in Seattle, like, you
I was in
can
Seattle. Yeah, well, I didn't drive to Seattle.
Okay, you're completely exotic. You're excused. Totally excused. Fact she's even here. Yeah. Yeah. Really? Because you got road. Yeah. How many fingers am I holding up? Just kidding. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it very much. And it's a pleasure to meet you, sir. Your biggest weapon is your smile and being open. That's your biggest weapon. Nobody wants to talk to a grouch. If you don't feel good about doing that open house, they can smell that on you. You've all been there. Go to open houses on the weekend. There is a lady, Karen Briscoe, who's an enormously successful real estate agent, Keller Williams and McLean. Karen previews 10 houses a week. 10 a week. If she's in the neighborhood and sees a house for sale, she's driving to the grocery store, she stops and previews the house. How well do you think she knows the neighborhoods in Northern Virginia? Yeah. So if you write that down, you do 10 a week, you're going to know Northern Virginia cold in a year. You're going to know every nook and cranny, what houses are selling for and what they're not selling for. It's not hard. You like to look at houses. You're driving to the grocery store. You're driving to work. Stop and look at that house that's for sale. Pull up out front. You got your card, right? Or whatever that little magic thing is that you get in houses.
Don't even need that anymore. Just use your phone.
Yeah.
Call and make sure you check.
Yep. Sooner rather than later, it's going to pay off. Somebody's going to say, I'm interested in a house in this neighborhood. You know, I was just there 2 weeks ago. Now, part of else what she does, and I'll exit with this. If she goes into a neighborhood and just stops by and previews a house, if she knows somebody from her database who lives in that neighborhood, she calls them. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, I'm right up the street at 123 Main Street, 2 blocks from your house, and this house is for sale. I'm going to go in and take a look. Do you have a minute? You can run over and we'll look at it together. Everybody wants to see everybody else's house. How strong is that bond right there? Oh, wow. Who do you think they think of when they need some real estate? Think Karen gets some referrals from that? It's pretty simple. It's not even hard. And she's having fun doing it because she's looking at houses and previewing houses. Stuff you learn from professionals, right? Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, sir.
You going to unwire me?
I'll unwire you and wire myself. Okay. All right. I will do that. For the answer to that question. Now, Monday, guys, remember Monday is our mock settlement. It would behoove everyone to be here and participate, there are more gift cards to be handed out, especially for those who've completed their homework. Hello? Besides Dennis, has anyone done their 5 opens and 3 brokers? Jana? Susie? What about you guys online? Have you done your homework? They're just ignoring me. Yeah, earlier, I don't think they could talk, but I can't find anything that's preventing them from talking to us. So, well, it's 9:15 right now, 9:45. Do you guys want to break now, or do you want me to talk for like half hour, 40 minutes, and then take a break? Talk? Okay. You just love to hear me talk. I think my daughter didn't get a kick out of the fact that people will sit in class and listen to me talk. So we finished up with the VA financing, and we're going to do conventional and FHA later. I've asked Rachel to print off some documents for you guys. Actually, the conventional financing is in here. But let's go ahead and go to, I forgot my mouse. What's that?
She was asking about the handouts.
Yeah, no, my weekend went sideways, so I have to finish putting that together, the handout for you guys. I had to just take some personal time this weekend and rest and be with family. So let's go to page 75. We worked on the let's see. We did the VA the other day, but I want to talk about the Ferpa real quick. In this area, more than other parts of the country, perhaps, and they've made it an addendum. They've put it in the contract. It's in our listing agreements now. It's in the buyer's agreement, but I know it's in the listing agreement. So Ferpa is foreign investor in real estate. So those who are investing that are not citizens or green card holders are allowed to invest in real estate in the United States. It's when they sell that real estate that there are implications. So if you have a foreign investor who is the seller of the property, they need to sign this document, and then the buyer has to acknowledge it. So this addendum is made, whatever date, to the sales contract offered on. Now remember, the offered on is not the ratification date. It is the date on the top of the residential sales contract. It's the date that it was offered. Between buyer and seller for the property. So the following provisions are incorporated into and made part of this contract. Seller is a foreign person as identified by the Foreign Investor in Real Estate Tax Act, known as FERPA. The parties agree to cooperate with each other to effectuate the following statutory requirements. Buyer is required to withhold 15% of the sales price on behalf of the seller for the transfer if that amount exceeds $1 million. If the sales price for the transfer is $1 million or less, and the buyer will use the property as his primary residence, then the Internal Revenue Code may allow a buyer to withhold 10% of the sales price. Buyer is required to pay withheld amount to the Internal Revenue Service and file an IRC form, which includes both seller and buyer tax identification number. There may be an exemption from withholding or limitation on the amount to be withheld. If seller proceeds are not sufficient to cover the withholding obligation, seller shall provide at settlement cash equal to such excess for purposes of making such withholding payment. This is kind of scary when you read it, right? This is all done by the title company, but the buyer has to be aware. So that's why they've kind of put the onus on the buyer's agent to make sure to ask the question. Now, I can say coming from the perspective of reviewing listing agreements, especially since this question has been added to the listing agreement and contracts both, I find that this question goes unanswered more than 50% of the time on both listing agreements and on the contract itself. I don't know why agents are afraid to ask their client, or they just are assuming. I don't know what it is, but it has to be answered. So as a buyer's agent, you need to ask the other side, is your client FERPA or not? If they don't have it anywhere listed that there's a FERPA, you just say, is your client FERPA or not? So that you know you've asked that question, put it in an email, and you covered yourself. Because you do not want your buyer to get in the last few days of closing and find out that that seller is FERPA and everything gets halted until the finances get worked out with the IRS. Okay? So just know that it is a serious document. It's not to be taken lightly, but don't forget, I saw too many in the last week of listing agreements that are just non-including. It's a simple yes or no. Do you have a question, Dennis?
So does FERPA status show up in the MRIS anywhere?
Yes, I think it does now because it is a question, but we'll double check that. I know they've added it to the listing agreement. It's up to the buyer's agent to verify it for the contract. Don't leave it blank. Don't assume that the seller's going to fill it in when you send it over. Because what is the listing agent looking at? A normal listing agent, not a thorough listing agent. They're looking at price, financing, subsidy, home inspection, appraisal. But price, financing, and subsidy are the main things. When they get an offer in, boom, 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 they know which pages to go to. And that's what they're looking at. They may or may not go back and really look page by page, and you should. You should look at an offer page by page. You have to make sure everything's been checked off. What needs to be entered in needs to be entered in. Yes, Dennis?
Would it make sense to, just as a matter of practice for every contract that you do for purchase, just go ahead and do the FERPA addendum, and then whether or not the other side, I mean, that way you're always covered. Is just that's my practice.
You can. It just it just becomes superfluous to the file. You can certainly do that, but a phone call or an email ahead of time. I always call the agent. I try to reach them on the phone. I follow it up with them. An email memorializing the conversation. But I always call and just double check. I ask what's the preferred closing time, what their client situation is. And, I didn't see any documents for FERPA. Want to make sure that they're there. And, oh, by the way, I don't see your DPOR residential disclosure online. The house was built in 1960. I don't see your lead-based paint online. Could you get those documents to me so I can make them part of my original offer? If a listing agent ever says to you, oh, just take some blanks and have your client sign them and send them, no. The answer is no. And again, it's no, because those disclosures are disclosures from the seller to the buyer. Why would you ever have your buyer sign a blank lead-based paint and a blank residential disclosure? Because they're giving up all their rights to say, I don't, you're letting the seller not disclose anything because your buyer has signed it. And you will be shocked. Now, a listing agent who's done their due diligence in the listing agreement, who has gotten all those documents signed during the listing agreement time, because they are part of the listing agreement. The listing agreement is more than just the document known as exclusive right to list. It includes all the disclosures, right? Because it says that. There are addenda that go along. So it depends on if the house was built before 1978, if the lead-based paint becomes part of that. If the house is not a foreclosure, REO, an estate, then the residential disclosure is an automatic document that's added to that. So once it's signed and it goes on the market, so the sellers have signed it, the broker has signed it, it's a ratified document. Once you put everything into Keystone, you should, the moment that you finish inputting everything else, you should upload those disclosures so that anyone making an offer has access to them. And unfortunately, that does not happen often. Another thing to add into that sidebar, guys, sorry everyone, is the chattels or the conveyances, what conveys. You don't want to make a copy of that whole thing per se that's your listing agreement with your client. But you could just redact out that one paragraph of what the conveyances are and upload that as a separate document too, so people can easily see this is what's being conveyed. And it's easier to read from that than reading through the script and picking out the things. But that's another thing you can do, but you don't have to. But you'll be shocked how many times I've spoken to, as a transaction coordinator and as an agent myself, spoken to listing agents and asked for their disclosures. And when I get them, guess what the date is? The day I ask. It is not the date that it says that they put in the listing 3 weeks ago. So I'm always like, did they really have a listing agreement, with those people? It's always a curiosity for me. It's like, why is it, But anyway, that's why I teach this class. My goal has always been to guard against agents working that way and to protect yourself, to protect your broker, to protect yourself, so that when you spend all the time, like Ed talked about, your biggest commodity is your time, and you've got to guard your time, so that you're spending it wisely and you're not spinning your wheels when it comes to working with your clients. Okay, so let's back up a little bit to page 69. So conventional financing. Okay. The contract of sale with an offer date. Look, I did not see this online the other day, and I'm not sure what happened, if I had the wrong file. So let me just send Rachel a message telling her that we don't need this after all, because we did find it. Sorry about that, everyone. What about Maryland and DC? Okay, there we go. That's why I didn't see it. All right, so yeah, let's skip 69. I don't want to do that one. I believe that there's been, I think there's been a copy error somewhere along the way. And okay, so the FHA is also Maryland. Because I taught a Maryland and DC class, so somehow I think it's probably my fault. We've got them combined in there somehow in the wrong order. Okay. Yeah, there's definitely a page mess up, so I need to fix this. Okay, so we talked about page 78, which is for your protection, get a home inspection. So, if your client's doing an FHA, it's a must. You can make this a practice across the board so you don't forget. Okay. Now the next thing is our home inspection and radon contingency addendum, page 79. Okay, again, the addendum is made. Now, generally speaking, you're making this addendum at the same time you're making your offer. So if we're making the offer today, February 5th, it would be this addendum is made February 5th to the contract offered on February 5th between the Smythes and the Jonases for 1234 Main Street. Okay. Once you populate that in your transaction file online, except for the date that it's made on, it should pre-populate. But when you go to each and every document, always go up top and make sure it is complete and fully complete and correct. Because when the documents are set up in the online electronic services, whether it's zip forms, Authentisign, or .loop, it's humans that are putting these fields in here that get auto-populated. And so one could be missed along the way, okay? And in some jurisdictions, like in Maryland and DC, the agent is not permitted to fill in certain fields. So, and other times on documents like that, even though the agent should be permitted to fill in the top section, it bars them from doing so, okay? So home inspections with the option to negotiate repairs or void. So recently, our home inspection addendum changed, and the big change is paragraph 2, but let's start with paragraph 1 and understand why they're different. So the first paragraph, inspection, this contract is contingent upon a home inspection contingency until 9 p.m. blank days after ratification. 7 to 10 is normal, okay? Again, it's negotiated, and the more time you have there, the buyer prefers, the seller prefers less time. So if it's a multiple offer situation, the seller may not want it more than 5 or 6 days. So this is where you have your home inspector you've worked with. I don't know if Donna Free and Associates will appreciate me sharing this, but what I do, if I know I'm going into a multiple offer situation, and I believe my offer is really strong, not really knowing what the other side is, but I know I have a strong offer, we're offering over ask or whatever, I will call Donna Frio and say, okay, what is your available schedule for this next 7 days or 5 days? And I'll say, could I pencil in a time for 24 hours, knowing that if they do get a solid lead they have to do there, of course they need to do that. And that way I know that if the seller comes back and says, if I've asked for 10 days and they come back and say 7, I want to be sure that I can get an inspector over there during that time. You know, I also have asked my client during our, you know, our buyer's agreement time, during our time driving around, you know, what's your schedule like? If you have to take off, let's say we ratify on a Monday and you only have until Saturday to get the home inspection done. Saturday is not the day we want it to be the last day. So what time during the week can you take off to be at the home inspection? You know, have you spoken to your employer if you have one? You know, do they have to take leave? Can they leave early one day? So, you know, there's these conversations you have to have. You have to have them in the back of your mind, and it becomes second nature after a while, but it's all these bits and pieces that have to come together that you just have to think through. So you want to have somewhat settled with your buyer the expectation that they're going to have to give a hunk of time. And remember, when those who were here, Joey said 2 to 4 hours, depending on the size of the property. I've known agents who've been at these multi-million-dollar properties. They've been there for 8 hours, you know, looking through these properties. It's a whole day commitment. So you have to plan for that. You have to plan for the drive time around it, depending on where it is. So you've got that day set aside, and you're ready to roll and negotiate. So pursuant to the terms of the contract, seller will have all utilities in service. If for any reason the utilities are not in service, home inspection deadline will be extended until 9 p.m. blank days after the buyer receives notice from the seller that all utilities are in service. I put 5 days in there because you're at the mercy of the utility company, you know, and if it's not done in 5 days, it just extends another 5 days because you cannot do a home inspection without the utilities. If your client is purchasing an REO, an estate, a foreclosure, and you were there during the preview of the home and the utilities weren't on, don't assume that the listing agent and the seller have been smart enough to get them turned on as soon as the contract was ratified. Or if they did, that's when you call the seller, the listing agent, and say, okay, we noticed that the lights were on, but the water was off. You know, it's wintertime, That's one of the things they'll often turn off is the water. Has the water been turned back on? Well, we've spoken to, our handyman. He's winterized the house and he's due out there on Thursday to turn it back on. Well, you can't have a home inspection before Thursday, and I certainly wouldn't schedule the home inspection on Thursday. So even though you might have a 7-day home inspection period, the utilities are not on. So your 7 days doesn't start until after the water is back on, right? Because you cannot do a home inspection. So don't be afraid to ask the other agent what's going on with utilities. Don't show up there with your clients who've taken off time with the chance that the utilities may not be on, okay? In a home that's lived in, you're not going to run into that. But if it's vacant or it's REO estate being sold, then those are things you want to be careful of, especially in the wintertime, okay? Now, when the inspector goes in the wintertime, in the summer, when a house is vacant, in the summertime, they may have the AC set to like 75 or 78. So it's not really running too much. So the house is going to be warm when you get in the house, when it's 100 degrees outside. It's going to feel a little bit cooler, but it's not going to feel really cool. Do not panic and do not allow your clients to panic. The inspector, when they get there, they will go around and they will turn it down to reasonable temperatures to let the house cool. They'll see how long it takes it to cool, and they're going to check all that. Same in the winter, a vacant house, oftentimes the heat will just be set enough to keep the pipes in the house from freezing. It might be at 60, 58. Most inspectors and most people don't like to see it much below that. But I've been in the homes when it's been 55, 57 degrees. The heat set that low in the house. Again, the home inspector is going to turn that heat up, and in the course of the time that you're there over a couple hours, they will know if it's working and how long it takes to warm the house, okay? All right, so if the results of such inspections are unsatisfactory to buyer, in buyer's sole discretion, buyer shall deliver to seller prior to the home inspection deadline an entire copy of the report and the written addendum listing the specific existing deficiency of the property that the buyer would like seller to remedy, together with the buyer's proposed remedies, and that's the home inspection addendum, or an entire copy of the report and a notice to void the contract. So there's a home inspection removal contingency, and it is on page 82. So it says this addendum is made on, so it's sometime past the date of the contract, in accordance with the offer, in accordance with the sales contract ratified on. So this is the one document where it's a ratified date, okay? So the ratified date goes on there between the purchaser and the seller for the property specified, 1234 Main Street. Contract referenced above includes home inspection contingency. A complete copy of the home inspection reports is or are attached for your information review. The specific deficiencies of the property that the purchaser would like seller to remedy are listed below, together with purchaser's proposed remedies. Purchaser agrees to remove the home inspection contingency upon seller's agreement to do the following, okay? So recently, we were doing a removal for someone, and all they had to do was simply pay for the HMS warranty. The seller was willing to accept everything as it was, with the seller paying for the home HMS warranty, and it was a bank on the other side. So it said, agreement to the following, seller to pay for HMS warranty, amount blank, invoice attached. Well, that bank came back and said it was a poorly written addendum and wouldn't accept it because all they read was the verbiage. They did not read the preceding paragraph because they're not a Virginia agent. They're not a seller, I just thought it was amusing. I was like, okay, I can put as much flowery language in there if you want me to, but it's straightforward. It doesn't have to be flowery. It's just a straightforward communication. Now, if you have, now Joey talked about this, when they do a summary report And most of the companies do a summary page and they list 1 through whatever of what they have found that could be moderately defective or defective. Okay. And so most companies have symbols or words. So you're really looking for defective items. That's your main objective in a home inspection, is looking for those things that are defective. Okay. So that's really what you want to share with the seller. Look, not that the paint's peeling on the wall. That's not a defect. That's a cosmetic. Again, GFIs, if the house is grandfathered, GFIs are not required to be fixed by the seller. You can certainly, the buyer can certainly ask for it. The seller can reject it. The ground fault interrupter things, you know, the 3-prong. Bathroom and kitchens, you know, and back in the, Right. So, but again, a home inspector may say, so a home inspector who wants to be an alarmist, who might also be an electrician, there's no GFI in the bathrooms. There's no GFI in the kitchen. So it puts fear in the mind of that buyer. It's not that big of an expense to fix it. Again, the seller's not required to under the law. They've done nothing to mess up their grandfather's status, but the buyer wants it fixed. Again, those things are negotiable. But as a buyer's agent, you're trying to get your client to focus on what the defects are. So what's really deficient, especially if you know, they tell you that the HVAC may not last more than 3 months. You know, that's deficient. It's working now, but it's in bad shape. But they can't really say that, right? They can't say it's only going to last 3 months. No one knows. But they can say it's really bad shape. So that might be an item you could put on here. So you would just enumerate the items, or the alternative is you could say something to the effect of, see attached summary page as Exhibit A, and then just attach it as part of this document. So you might have 3 pages to a summary page. So see attached summary page, pages 1 through 3 attached. And then on that page, you can highlight what you want fixed, as opposed to retyping everything, if it's more than this little allows. Question, Susie? Go ahead and take the mic. No, take the mic so we can hear your question. No, it's any question's a good question, because my mind moves weirdly. Go ahead.
Well, if the buyer lists a bunch of deficiencies that they want fixed, and he sends it back, and then the seller says, I'm not doing any of that, can the buyer still say, okay, I want the house, or is all of a sudden the whole contract void?
Yes and no. So yes, if they have the funds to fix everything. No, if their lender says they can't. So if it was system related, like the roof, the HVAC, hot water heater, a VA and FHA loan would probably not fund on the house without those being fixed.
If the buyer's just trying to see if he can get the seller to fix things that are
like a GFI that's grandfathered, yes.
Yeah. And then the seller says, I'm not doing that, forget it.
Right.
But the buyer can still.
The buyer can void, or they can accept it the way it is.
Okay, so they have a time to go back and talk about it without
Right.
it being saying the seller says, we're not doing that, and now it's all void.
Correct.
Okay.
So now let's go back over to answer that question, back over to page 79. But again, depending on the amount of deficiencies, whether you use that box there or you attach an exhibit to it, you can do either way. So here, negotiation period. In the event that A1 above, so A1 is that we're stating the entire contract along with the inspection removal, okay, with our request for deficiencies. We're on page 79, negotiation period, paragraph B. So negotiation, in the event that paragraph A1 above, okay, A1 above says we're going to send the entire report with a written listing specifying the deficiencies and asking the seller to remedy it. So in the event that we do A1, all parties shall have blank days to negotiate after buyer delivers the inspection addendum negotiation period to negotiate a mutually acceptable written addendum addressing these deficiencies. Negotiation period can be, again, it's agreed upon time. Honestly, 3 days should be your minimum. 5 days is sufficient because it's both parties to respond. Most of the agents who've been around for more than a decade have, in the last few years, have gotten used to this language here. Prior to this language, and you might run into it on a rare occasion, you had a negotiation period where you had so many days for the buyer to give something to the seller, and the seller had so many days to give it back, and it went back and forth like that until it was resolved. Then a couple years ago, they changed it to say, okay, here is the negotiation period. Both parties to negotiate back and forth. It can be discussed verbally between agents, but everything has to be in writing at the end. So Susie and Dennis, listing agent, buyer's agent, the buyer's agent sent over all of these deficiencies and your seller has said no to most of them. You have a 3-day negotiation period. You might call Dennis up and say, look, Dennis, thank you for your information. My seller, they're pretty adamant. There's nothing really wrong in the house. I can see your buyer. They might be afraid that the GFIs aren't working, but we're not going to fix that. The only deficiency is the one broken sash in the window, and he will take care of that. We don't want to waste time going back and forwards writing this up. Could you just check with your buyer to see if they will accept that? I will then prepare the counter offer to send to you. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Dennis is not going to say, oh, just go ahead and send it, Susie, and I'll get my people to sign it. No, Dennis needs to talk to his client so that when you send it over, they understand what's coming and they're going to agree to it. Because that's why that window doesn't have to be a huge amount of time. It doesn't have to be in writing back and forwards necessarily. The final result needs to be in writing, but there's nothing wrong with the two agents discussing options. Now, if it's very technical, then yes, you want to put it in writing. We're going to take 1, 3, 5, 6, 9, and on number 7, second pass, a paragraph has to be done. At that point, yeah, just get it in writing, get it done. Because it's not uncommon that the seller takes that page and they just put a big cross right through it, and they put their initials. They're not doing anything. So back to Susie's question. So it comes back from Susie's seller that they're not going to do anything. And Dennis's buyer is just miffed. It's like, what do you mean? So Dennis, as a professional, said, well, as we discussed, there's no deficiencies here. Okay? There are things to be done. But your client still is not satisfied. You could go back to Susie and say, look, my clients really would like some of this stuff fixed. What about your client giving us a credit of $500 and let my client have the GFIs fixed? I know your seller probably doesn't want to spend the time and effort right now, but it'll make my client feel better. There's nothing wrong with that conversation. Doesn't mean they have to do it, but it means you can ask. Susie talks to her seller, and seller says, okay. Now, before you actually approach that subject with Susie, you need to make sure that your buyer can take the credit. So you call the lender, you call up Ed and say, hey, Ed, just wondering about subsidy. My client may want some subsidy. You don't say money for repairs. The banks don't want to know that something's wrong. You just say, my client might have the opportunity to get some subsidy. They all know what that means, but just don't say the word. And could they accept a $500 subsidy? Or what is the maximum amount because maybe you haven't decided on amount yet. What's the maximum amount of subsidy my client can accept? So then you have that in your head. Now, I usually start off before we write a contract knowing what the maximum amount of subsidy my client can accept. Because you can always ask for subsidy up front, to help towards closing cost. So, if the lender has told me they can accept $11,000 in subsidy and we've asked for $5,000 in closing costs, I should have $6,000, there to work with. But again, Always double check with your lender, what kind of subsidy can my client get? Then you broach, could I get money in lieu of repairs? And it could just be that the seller is in the middle of moving. They do not want to get an electrician in. They don't want to deal with the GFI situation. But yeah, $500, if it makes this go away and moves on, then they're willing to do that, right? But again, if the seller says no, then your client, Dennis, has to make the decision. Am I going forward with it as is? And if not, then we go back up to number 2 here. They've already gotten the copy of the report. Then you just send the notice to void the contract and the release of the deposit. So under Virginia law, as long as you're within your time frame, your buyer can void for whatever reason on the home inspection. Exactly. And they don't even have to go to number 1. See, they can go straight to number 2. Let's say they've written a contract on a home, it's been ratified, there's no HOA. So therefore, the only out they have is the home inspection. So they have to pay for home inspection, has to be a bona fide home inspection. It can't be Brother John coming in writing up some simple thing that they didn't pay for. And then they can void the contract immediately without any reason, no explanation. They just have to provide the written report to the seller, notice to void, and release of earnest money deposit. The seller cannot argue about it. They can't ask why. They do not need to provide any explanation whatsoever. Okay? Yes.
So
Mike.
So every buyer in the state of Virginia, do they have a right to have the home inspection as part of their contract?
Yes.
Or can a seller say, no, I'm not going to take a contract with a home inspection?
A seller can. So in multiple offer situations, sometimes that's the first thing to go is the home inspection. The next thing would be the appraisal. So that's why we have paragraph 2. So we can skip down real quick to paragraph 2 down here. Home inspection with option to void only. So this is what we used to call, we wanted a home inspection for informational purposes only. So before we had to write that in the contract under other provisions on the last page of the contract, we would say our client wants to do a home inspection, but it's for informational purposes only. They want to know that if there's nothing wrong with that house, then they're going to move forward. They're not going to nickel and dime the seller for anything. And if there is something wrong that they don't feel comfortable with, they can void. So the state of Virginia has gone through and made it a separate paragraph to make it very clear that the home inspection contingency is good until 9 p.m., blank days after, upon the inspection provided by a licensed professional pursuant to the terms of the contract. Seller will have the utility services on, same paragraph before, so many days. If the result of such home inspections are unsatisfactory to buyer, in buyer's sole discretion, the buyer shall deliver to the seller a copy of the document and the notice to void. If seller fails to obtain an inspection, fails to deliver a copy of the inspection to the seller, or fails to deliver a notice voiding this contract prior to the home inspection deadline, this contingency will expire and this contract will remain in full force and effect. So they have to deliver it. They can't just let it pass. They still have timelines. But yes, they don't have to do it. So those who gave up their right to home inspections in the early 2000s, and when the market was moving crazily and fast and stuff, there was a fair amount of people who then sold their house a few years later, 2010, 2011, 2012, and their clients, because it was more of a buyer's market per se, wanted home inspections. And then they started finding out some not so nice things about their home. The chimneys were cracked. This was, because they themselves had never done a home inspection. So they really didn't know what their home was. Now that wasn't everybody, but there was a good portion of that. So when, as a buyer's agent in that time, you wanted to look at when the house was sold and, almost assume, depending on the neighborhood, that there was no home inspection done. So you definitely wanted your client to have a home inspection. You definitely want to be a thorough home inspection, because people just gave up rights for everything. Appraisal rights, people were paying cash. A cash investor could come in and change the what a house is worth in a neighborhood overnight, basically. Pemmon Hills Homes. I bought my house from my parents in 2003 for $350,000. And it was just barely hitting that mark at that time in October. And within 2 years, barely less than 2 years, it had almost hit $600,000 because of the investors coming in paying cash for those properties. Now, when the market changed, it went down to $250,000 and back down, But that's what happens. It was unreal, the price. And you most of you were not in the market then. Dennis, I know you were an agent before, but it was an unreal time. Lots of multiple contracts, but was real estate done well during that time? No. There was a lot of title companies that were not honest and ethical, a lot of lenders. There was a lot of collusion and corruption, which is why we've really tightened up a lot of things that we do now because of that. Unfortunately, in some ways, it's almost restrained us too much. But anyway, I digress. So let's go back up to paragraph C, the buyer's election. If at the end of the negotiation period, the parties are unable to reach an agreement, buyers shall have the option to void this contract by delivering notice to the seller by, say, 3 days following the end of the negotiation period. Otherwise, home inspection contingencies shall be removed and the contract will remain in full force and effect. So this is where agents mess up a lot. You got your negotiation period up here. So buyer's agent gives to the seller agent the home inspection removal contingency, okay, with a list of things they want fixed. Okay, so I do it today, which is the 5th of February, and I have a 3-day negotiation period under paragraph B. Okay, so that's the 6th, the 7th, the 8th at 9 p.m. So by the 8th at 9 p.m., buyer and seller should have come to an agreement, and on page 82, the home inspection removal contingency at that point should be signed by both parties and everything agreed upon, right? But we've got a stubborn seller who just will not agree to no matter what the negotiation period is. The buyers really want the house. Let's say there's $1,000 worth of repairs. The buyer has the money, but they're starting to become stubborn as well. So again, the buyer delivered the document today, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 9 p.m. So Thursday at 9 p.m., buyer and seller have not agreed on what to do. There's been no agreement. So that's where we come in here with the buyer's election. At this point, the buyer has to elect what they want to do. If the buyer ignores it, then their right to any remediation goes away and the contract remains in full force and effect. Now, the dates you put in here, often you see 3 because of the weekend. People just tend to use that. But again, it's negotiable. It could just be 1 day. The seller may say 1 day. If we can't come to an agreement under paragraph B, the buyer has 1 day to make a decision what they want. So then by 9 p.m. Friday night, the buyer has to say, I'm going to take it as is, or I'm going to void. And if by 9 p.m. Friday night, the buyer has not chosen either one, they did choose. By default, they lost their right to negotiate. They've lost their right to void, and the contract remains in full force and effect. Okay? Now, the seller might think, I'm out of hot water. They've gone for it. We don't have to fix anything, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to void. Now, if there's HOAs still in play, the buyer can then void then as well. One of the things I've done because of experience and where it's caught me on the wrong side in a home inspection once was the home inspector said the fascia board was in bad shape and it was listed on the home inspection repair and the seller wasn't going to fix it. And the buyer agreed. They agreed to the major things. Well, then when the HOA documents came in, a violation was that the fascia board needed to be fixed. So the buyer is responsible for all those remedies, remember? But the buyer gave up the right in the home inspection. So one of the things that I've written in my home inspection removal is that all violations to the HOA, whether they coincide with the home inspection or not, must be fixed. So there's no unclear language between the seller and buyer that if there's something that the HOA finds that's a violation, and it was also found by the home inspector that they cannot not fix it. They are required to fix those violations. And then, of course, they can also offer, the seller can offer money up for that as well if the buyer can take it. But it was one of those things that it was a significant amount of money with the fascia board, and there was a tree that a stump wasn't removed in the yard. So from that particular incident, I decided that we were going to put that in there. And I've only ever had one agent object to it. And I said, I asked him, what's your objection? Your client really is responsible for what the HOA requires them to keep their property up. And just because it happens to be a home inspection item as well, it should not exclude them from fixing it. So any questions about that so far? So let's stop and take a 10-minute break till a little bit more than 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:40, and then we'll do the radon and move on from there. We're back online here. Thank you to those for hanging in online with us. Okay, so now we're doing our radon testing. Now, those who are here online and in class with Donna Free and Associates, I hope we made it really clear that you as agents, not only with the home inspection, with the radon too, you do not give advice. No one knows if there's radon from one house to the next. All the houses in the neighborhood may not have radon, and the one house your client is purchasing could have radon in it. It's not a lot of money. It's $130, $40, $50 thereabouts. But it's up to your client. They need to decide for themselves if there's radon in the home or not. And Ed wasn't here, the owner who founded Donna Free and Associates, but he has been in a situation where they did find it in a third-story condo. And it was the way the pipes came up from the ground floor that caused that radon to be in the third-story condo. So it is possible. So again, radon, just much like the home inspection, you're given a time period. The simplest thing is to replicate this time to match the home inspection time. Most home inspection companies of any quality are going to be able to do both of these inspections. Donna Frio and Associates, for example, as much as they can, they work with the listing agent to get access to the home, usually 2 days prior to your home inspection. They go in and set the canister in there, the little digital readout thing that they use, the box. So that way on the day of home inspection, they can also read that report and produce it as part of your home inspection and radon report. So they have to work with the sellers in order to do that. Donna Frio does have access, central lock access through their agreement with MVAR as a contractor, so they can get in on their own. We don't have to be there present with them. So that's a nice thing that they can do. Now, if they go into the home and notice that the windows are open, they're going to say, we can't leave the canister. So there has to be certain conditions. So let's go ahead and read the paragraph. So the buyer at the buyer's discretion and expense, having the property inspected for the presence of radon and receiving a report, a radon from the test by a radon professional certified by the National Radon Safety Board or the National Radon Proficiency Program, radon professional using U.S. Environmental Protection Agency approved testing methods. Testing devices to be placed and retrieved by the radon professional. So you as an agent should never go and pick up a radon box for anybody. Pursuant to the terms of this contract, seller will have all utilities in service. If for any reason utilities are not in service, radon testing deadline will extend, right? So it's going to extend just like everything else. Testing guidelines. Seller agrees to follow the EPA guidelines and testing recommendations in order to produce accurate results. These guidelines include the following requirements to be in place 12 hours prior to a scheduled test period and throughout the duration of the test. All windows must remain shut. Exterior doors should be used only for normal ingress and egress and must not be left open. Whole house exhaust fans or smaller fans near the testing device must not be used. Thank you. So, thank you, Dennis. So you have a seller who loves to sleep with the windows open year round. They're going to have to spend that 12 hours prior to them coming to put in and the following 2 days. So 3 nights minimum without having their windows open. They cannot leave their windows open during the day. They cannot put fans on in the basement, overhead, side fans, nothing. They cannot do that because they are then changing the actual conditions in the home. They're causing the air to disperse away from the box. So if I were to set my radon box here, and then I've got fans pushing everything away from it, it's not getting an accurate reading, okay? again, if the windows are open. So if they have young children and it's spring and summertime, they can't leave the basement door open with just the screen door for the kids to go in and out. So it's an effort on the seller, but they have to comply. Now, when they come back and pick up the box, they can tell that it's not been done right. There's indications that, now, this is not the box that you go online and order for yourself a do-at-home kit. This is a much more sophisticated device that they use. So again, as a listing agent, you are having this conversation with your seller, okay? Mr. and Mrs. Seller, do you sleep with your windows open? Yeah, but our room's on the 3rd floor. This is in the basement. It does not matter. You cannot have your window open. You cannot have your fans running in the basement. You can have your fan running in the bedroom, but you can't have your fans on in the basement. Yes, Susie? They can reset the test. So if they find out, so should Radon Professional indicate in writing that these requirements have not been met, seller shall pay for a new test under buyer's direction, and radon inspection contingency shall automatically be extended X amount of days after the seller notifies buyer that the requirements are in place. So as a listing agent, when your seller has received this offer and you're going over the contract with them, and this is an addenda to the contract, you are reading this paragraph with your client, the seller, saying, do you understand your responsibilities here? Because if you don't do this, and even if it's your kids, if they deem that this report was, something was not done properly, then you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, have to pay for the new inspection and start over again, okay? So if the radon report confirms the presence of radon that equals or exceeds the action level established by the EPA, buyer at buyer's sole discretion shall deliver to the seller prior to radon testing deadline an entire copy of the radon report and a written addendum requiring seller at the seller's expense prior to settlement to mitigate the radon conditions by contracting the NRSB and RPP listed remediation firm to reduce the presence of the radon below the action level established by the EPA, and to deliver buyer a written retest result by the buyer selected radon professional. So the buyer gets to select the professional to come back in and retest, okay? And follow the required testing guidelines, or an entire copy of the radon report and a notice to void the contract. If buyer fails to obtain the inspection or fails to deliver If the buyer fails to obtain an inspection or fails to deliver a copy of the radon report to seller, or fails to deliver a radon inspection addendum or notice voiding the contract prior to the radon testing deadline, this contingency will expire and this contract will remain in full force and effect with no radon inspection contingencies. So I've had situations where the buyer has put in that they want to do a radon test, but they actually never do it. You know, they've put it in the contract, but for whatever reason, they changed their minds. Their home inspector didn't do it, and the time ran, and they didn't do anything. They didn't send a notice to void it. They didn't send a notice to remove it. So it just goes away. If they don't take anything actionable, then it just goes away. They cannot void on it. So they have to do the test in order to void on it. But if it's in here and they choose not to do it after it's been a ratified contract, it just eventually times itself out. Again, negotiation period. In the event of B1 above, so B1 is the testing guidelines, the party shall have so many days after the buyer delivers a home inspection to negotiate a mutually acceptable written addendum. At any time during the radon negotiation period, buyer or seller may make, modify, rescind, or alter as many offers and counter offers as desired to reach a mutually agreed upon items. Buyer and seller may agree on terms by signing a written addendum describing agreed upon terms within the radon negotiation period. So this is referring to paragraph B1, right? So when you go back to paragraph B1, it says an entire written report to the seller at the seller's expense to mitigate. So the seller is supposed to mitigate. So this is referring to paragraph B1. Now, if the seller says they're not going to mitigate, what's the buyer's rights here? Right, to void. To void. Okay, buyer's election. If at the end of the radiation negotiation period, the buyers are unable to reach an agreement, buyers shall have the option to void contract by delivering a notice to the seller 9 p.m. so many days following the radon negotiation period. Otherwise, the inspection contingency shall be removed and the contract will remain in full force and effect. So again, just like the home inspection, if there's no agreement between buyer and seller on remediation or what they're going to do to fix the problem, and both sides are stubborn, they just a blind eye, and they both just put their backs to each other. If at the end the buyers have so many days election to void, or everything remains the same. So it's on the buyer's shoulders and the buyer's agent's shoulders to watch these deadlines. I would strongly encourage you, there might be an app out there, but simple calendaring your deadlines, hard, fast deadlines, and then giving yourself a 24-hour, 48-hour notice of those deadlines, on your phone. That's the beauty of the smartphones. Before we had our day timers, pieces of paper, you depend on transaction coordinators to keep everything calendared and call you as an agent to say, hey, you got deadlines ending and stuff. So just be very aware of your deadlines, and you need to be the eyes and ears for your client. Remind them. One of the things that I've done as a transaction coordinator for years and setting up groups doing that is when I'm talking to someone about a date, I say Thursday, February 8th, 2018. Wednesday, February 7th. Because sometimes if we don't say the day of the week, people they say, oh yeah, the 8th is fine. But then all of a sudden they realize, oh, the 8th is a Thursday and my kid has karate on Thursdays from 2 to 4. So that screws up their schedule. But they don't realize that till Wednesday night when they realize that the 8th is also Thursday. So it's a good practice when you're talking to your client about things, saying the date and the day. Because sometimes we, as humans, some of us use the days of the week that we go by. Those who work 9 to 5, they know when it's Friday. Realtors, not so much sometimes. Well, we might know if it's Tuesday or Wednesday maybe, but we usually know it's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Like Ed said, we're really concentrating a lot of time. That's how your business is set up. So those who work 9 to 5 tend to think Monday through Friday, and the weekends are different. But those of us who work pretty much around the clock, so to speak, as much as we try not to, but we can work any day, we think differently. As you're coming out of a 9 to 5 workaday world, you will find that your mind will start changing. Again, that's the blessing of the smartphones. It tells you what day it is when you look at it. It kind of reminds us what we're doing. Spending some time the night before, looking at that's a good thing, what your schedule is and where you need to be. So sidebar tips there. Okay, let's move on to page 83 of the lead-based paint. So again, if a home is built before 1978, not built in 1978, built before 1978, the seller has to disclose to the buyer that the house was built before 1978. And here are some statements that the seller is going to make. So first of all, for the sale of the property at, and put the address in there. Again, it should pre-populate. every purchaser of any interest in residential property on which a residential dwelling was built prior to 1978 is notified that such property may present exposure to lead from lead-based paint that may place young children at risk of developing lead poisoning. Lead poisoning in young children may produce permanent neurological damage, including learning disabilities, reduced intelligence quotient, behavioral problems, and impaired memory. Lead poisoning also poses a particular risk to pregnant women. The seller of any interest in residential real property is required to provide the buyer with any information on lead-based paint hazards from risk assessments or inspections in the seller's possession and notify the buyer of any known lead-based paint hazards. A risk assessment or inspection for possible lead-based paint hazard is recommended prior to purchase. So, for years, we really, like I said the other day, almost no one ever did a lead-based paint inspection. And I think because those that grew up here and hearing this over the years, the realization that the paint has changed and people's painted the walls, it's 3 or 4 layers since 1978. So the chance of actually running into lead-based paint is pretty minimal. You might run into a home that hasn't had paint on it since the 60s. If it's been the one owner or whatever, and to me that might be a higher risk. But people coming here from other countries and never having read this language, it scares them. So if you represent a buyer who is afraid of this, have them do that assessment. Just let them do it. Don't try to talk them out of it, because it might be the one buyer in the one house where there is lead-based paint exposed. But the person owning that home may have only bought it 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, so they have no knowledge. So what's going to happen is the seller has to disclose A, presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazard, check one below. Known lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards are present in the house. So I, as a seller, have absolute knowledge that there is lead-based paint in the house. It's been tested, it's been told to me, whatever. I have absolute knowledge. Excuse me. Or number 2, seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the home. So I have no knowledge of it. No one has concretely told me, Trish, this house is full of lead-based paint. Had someone told me that, they were someone who was certified to tell me that, or I hired a home inspector who came in and said, did you know all your paint's lead-based? No, I had no idea. Then at that point I have knowledge, I have to disclose it. But if I don't have knowledge, then you check the second box. And the seller or seller's initial. So this is where people get this one confused. It's just by virtue of the fact that this is so close here. You check either this box or this box. One of them has to be checked. And your seller's initial here. Okay? Now here it says B, records and reports available to the seller, check one below. Seller has provided the purchaser with available records, or seller has no reports or records. So if up here they've checked A, then chances are they have some type of report. So in most cases you're going to have check here, seller's initials here, seller's initials here. Where you're going to more than likely see this report is the seller has no knowledge and there are no reports. Okay? The 2 most common things you're going to see. If you do see that this has been checked, because remember you represent the buyer and the listing agent has provided this, and maybe they've just erroneously checked the wrong thing. If this is checked, then you need to ask them, could you please provide me with the reports? At which point they're going to say, what are you talking about? They've just accidentally checked the wrong box. But you as a buyer's agent need to clarify that. Do not assume that anyone has checked the wrong box. They would then have to correct it and then reinitial, okay? this stuff's happened. So back in the day, I should say, when I was office manager and I would get these reports from agents and all these boxes would be initialed by the buyer. And I'm looking at this going, purchaser has received an opportunity to review the copies of all information above. And this is no, and this is no. So my question always was, what did your purchaser review? And my answer from the agent always was, I was just told to make sure they check initial all three boxes. I said, well, from my paralegal background, that bothers me that you were told that, because your purchaser does not initial C if nothing's been provided to them. Okay? Purchaser has received the pamphlet, so here you go. It's D that where they initial that you've given them the EPA guidelines or that the seller provided it. But it's D that they acknowledge the receipt of the EPA guidelines. E, purchaser has, and then here they have to choose, received a 10-day opportunity or mutually agreed upon period to conduct a risk assessment, which means they're going to do a lead-based paint assessment, which is a separate addenda. Or they're waiving that opportunity to a risk assessment, and we're just going to move forward. So we're accepting your disclosure as is. So D and E need initials, and E needs having something answered. Okay? C does not require initials. So this is what's going to happen. You're going to have a listing agent call you up and say, Jana, your clients missed their initials on the lead-based paint on C, and we're not really ratified if they don't get them initialed. And Jana goes, I'm sorry. Your client did not provide us with any documentation, correct? Well, no, they didn't have anything. Well, then, just double check that paragraph. I'm pretty sure you'll see my reasoning that, no, we don't need to initial there. So now, next paragraph, the sales associates. So the federal government is making sure the sales associates understand what this law means, and they're saying to the listing agent. So if you're looking at the below down here, seller is on the left, purchaser on the right. So if I'm a listing agent, I'm going to initial in the left box. It really doesn't matter, but just try to keep things consistent when you can. And then the selling agent for the purchaser is going to initial on the right side up here, okay? So these two boxes get initialed. And then down here, the seller is signing as their disclosure. The listing agent is signing. The undersigned have reviewed the information above and certified to the best of their knowledge, agent and seller, the information is provided as accurate. And then the purchaser and the purchaser's agent sign it. Yes, Dennis?
Who initiates this one?
Seller.
So this should be done as part of the listing package.
Exactly. Who initiates this form? The seller, the seller's agent, the listing agent, the initial offering. So as a listing agent, good question. We'll go over that again. You're going to go meet your client. You've looked up their tax record. The house was built in 1962. So right off the bat, your mind as a realtor says, I need lead-based paint. And for my seller, I also need, it's not the disclosure. This document goes to the seller. It's tiny print. If you go to your page 84 in your book, you see it's almost not readable. But it's everything. It used to be on a legal document. They've now shrunk it down to be on letter size. But it's all the code that the government has put into place through the EPA that covers all these standards of disclosure and why you're required to produce it. Again, the federal lead-based paint disclosure is for the owner. It says at the top, it's information for the owner of the residential property. It does not go with the contract. Now, you'll find it in contracts. You can, No, it's for the owner's information. The owner, there are two separate documents. So the disclosure, which was the first one we looked at, the disclosure becomes part of the contract. That's document 1. But document 2 is information for the owners of residential property. And it's the owner who signs this as part of their listing agreement. So as you're preparing to go meet with your client, and the house was built in 1962, so you know you have your exclusive right to represent listing agreement. You have your residential disclosure, your DPOR form. Then you have these 2 documents that you give to one is for your client's information, explaining the rules and responsibilities they have to follow and disclosing the information. You have your client sign this document. Your useful information, your understanding, and then in our office, the affiliated business disclosure. So those are your documents. Your listing agreement, your DPOR residential disclosure, your lead-based paint disclosure, your lead-based paint federal, understanding, useful, and your affiliated business disclosure. So 7 documents for a home that's got lead-based paint. Okay. If they didn't have lead-based paint, you would take 2 of them away, you just have 5 documents. And only one of them is a disclosure, which is your DPOR disclosure that goes to the buyer. Everything else stays between the seller and the broker. Okay. It's only the disclosures that get shared with the buyer's agent and the buyer. Okay. So in our scenario here, because our case scenario was a 1977 home, our listing agent, I think it's Wonder Woman, she's representing Jane and John Jonas. So she's had them sign the residential disclosure and the lead-based paint disclosure. She's uploaded that online so that the buyer's agent can bring that down as a PDF, add it into their .loop. So you can add external files, and you'll go to David's class. And then as you're bringing in from .loop, you're bringing over your contract because you're making an offer. Okay. You're bringing over your home inspection contingency. You're going to bring over your VA financing contingency. And in our case, you're also bringing over the well and septic, right? And then from the online through the portal of the listing agent, Wonder Woman, you're going to download the residential disclosure and the lead-based paint, and you're going to upload those in to your .loop. And that constitutes your offer. Okay? Do you guys understand that? Does anyone want me to repeat it? Okay. So that constitutes your offer. Okay? And then your clients, because the listing agent has offered the lead-based paint, for example, in our case scenario, you would then ask your client, do you want to do a risk assessment? If so, then you bring in that addenda as well. But if not, then you would just set this up for your client to initial that they're going to waive it here, put their initials here and here, and then they're going to sign here, and then you're going to sign here as a buyer's agent. And you as a buyer's agent are going to initial here. Okay? So then that document's done as part of your offer package. And then the residential disclosure, your buyer signs that document at the bottom as well. All they're doing is acknowledging that they received it. You're not giving them any information about it, and you're not explaining anything to them about it. Okay? Yeah, this is a new document. We'll go back to that in a minute. So I want to go, let's see what page it's on. I want to do the well and septic. '87, thank you. Okay, so private well and or septic contingency addendum. So you can have a well without a septic, you can have a septic without a well. They're not, both of them do not have to be present on the property. Again, as a listing agent, you need to have that conversation with your client and ask them, are you public water and public sewer? And if not, if they say, no, we're septic, but we're on public water, what type of septic system do you have? Is it private? Is it community? Is it an alternative? Your client should be able to answer those questions. They need to be the one to answer those questions. Do not assume yourself what it is. Okay? You're not the authority. Just because you see some green junction box in the yard doesn't mean you know what that necessarily means. Okay? It would raise a question to me to ask my client, of course. But like I said, an agent of ours a couple years back sold a property in Reston, listed it, and did not know that there was a septic system, and nor did the person owning the home know they had one. They had bought it the year before and never paid attention to the fact that it had a septic system. So anyway, so again, at the top, this addendum is made on, generally it's the same day as the sales contract, unless for some weird reason you didn't know that there was well and septic, so it could be made a different date. But generally it goes along with the original offer. So in our case, between the Smythes and the Jonases for 1234 Mars Road. Water potability test. Potability meaning it's drinkable. If the property is on a private well, as indicated in the utilities and water, sewage, heating, and central air conditioning paragraph of the contract, so referring back to our original contract, the seller at the seller's expense or the buyer at the buyer's expense shall deliver to the other party on or before settlement a written report prepared by a Virginia certified laboratory dated not more than 90 days prior to settlement, ordered through the local health department or an insured private company, indicating that the well water is free from contamination by chloroform bacteria. Any such contamination indicated shall be remediated by seller at seller's expense, and the well water shall be retested at the seller's expense after remediation. Seller shall deliver to buyer on or before settlement a report issued by the Virginia Certified Laboratory indicating that the well water is free from contamination by chloroform bacteria dated not more than 90 days prior to settlement. So if you're a agent with a seller, there's nothing wrong with them going ahead and having their water tested. You're going to list their property. They've lived there, haven't had any issues. They may have a filtration on it inside the house. They can have a Culligan. They can have a purifier inside the home that they pay for that might be getting rid of some contaminants. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the well water itself may or may not be contaminated. They felt safe because they've got all these filters on there. They change it all the time. But if they're going to list a property, because more than likely, unless it's a negotiation thing, the buyer is going to ask the seller to have the water tested. So having it done ahead of time is not a big deal, especially if it's in a market where it's going to sell within 90 days. So having it done and out of the way is a good approach as you're going to start listing the home. Okay? But if not, then you're going to write down here the inspection period. The contract is or is not contingent upon the. So if you're going to have a well inspection, you can choose to have the property contingent or not contingent. Okay? So if you're going to have an inspection, but you don't care if it's in good shape or not, you'll fix it, then you would make it non-contingent. But more than likely, you want it to be contingent because you're protecting your client. What if it's a really bad situation? Buyer at the buyer's discretion, expense, and sole risk of damage to the well and or property shall retain a professional and insured inspector to inspect the well or well water for the well inspection. So the buyer has the right to choose for the well and the well inspection if the seller hasn't provided a potable test already. And even if they have, the buyer still at the buyer's expense choose to have their own done. Okay? If the results of the well inspection are unsatisfactory to buyer, in the buyer's sole discretion, buyer shall deliver to the seller prior to the well inspection deadline an entire copy of the report and a written addendum listing the specific existing deficiencies of the well and or the well water that the buyer would like to seller to remedy, together with buyer's proposed remedies. Now, sometimes that could be that the pump's not working. I've been in a home before where everyone thought the well had run dry, but it was just that the pump had broken. Okay. So when they're testing the well, they're all testing the depth, how much water flow that it is, you know, what they call the percolability, how many people can live in that home off of that well. So if you have a family of 10 moving into a home where 3 have lived, is it sufficient well so a buyer would want to know that. If I'm moving a family of 10 into a home where 3 have lived, is my well sufficient to keep up? If I have 5 teenagers showering half hour a day each, when you live with a well, you have to limit their showers. An entire copy of the report and a written addendum specified. Okay, an entire copy of the report and notice to void. If buyer fails to obtain a well inspection, fails to deliver a copy to the report to the seller, or fails to deliver inspection addenda or notice voiding, like everything else, the contingencies will expire and the contract will remain in full force and effect. So again, deadlines. Do not mess around with your deadlines. Negotiation period. In the event of B1 above, the inspection period, the parties shall have blank days after buyer's delivery of inspection addendum to negotiate a mutually acceptable written addendum addressing the deficiencies. At any time during the negotiation period, buyer or seller may make, modify, rescind, or alter as many offers and counter offers as desired and reach a mutually acceptable terms. Buyer and seller may agree on terms by signing a written addendum describing agreed upon deficiencies or remedies within the negotiation period. Again, just like the other contingencies, that paragraph does not exclude the agents themselves from having verbal discussions during that negotiation period to fine-tune what the two parties want to agree upon. Once they agree upon it, you can put it in writing. You're going to find that some agents are willing to do the verbal negotiations. Some are not. Some always want it in writing no matter what, and just do that. If you encounter an agent who is abusive, derogatory, cursing you on the phone, just stop the verbal communication. Just keep it to writing at that point, because you're not going to get anywhere. Just don't waste your time. Buyer's election. If at the end of the negotiation period, the parties are unable to reach an agreement, buyer shall have the option to void this contract by delivering notice to the seller by 9 p.m. blank days following the end of the negotiation period. Otherwise, the well inspection contingency shall be removed and this contract remain in full force and effect. Now, well inspectors depend on the time of year. Some are busier than others. So again, give yourself ample time to get them out there. So when you're writing this, 21 days, I would not go less than 21 days. Try to do it as soon as possible, but you want to make sure you get them out there in a timely fashion if the buyer is the one ordering it. Okay? Any questions about the wells? Again, we are not authorities on wells, even if you live with a well. Every well is different. The time of the year, the water, all that can make a difference. So you leave it to the professionals. Do not give your opinion. Okay? Septic. Alternative septic maintenance contract. A seller does or does not have a maintenance contract. If seller does have a maintenance contract, seller will provide a copy to the buyer within 15 days of the date of ratification. Maintenance contract shall, subject to contractor approval, or shall not convey to the buyer. So it might be a company who has an agreement with the particular seller to manage their property, to manage their septic system. They might come out on a quarterly, yearly, biannual basis to check the septic field, and to do a walkover inspection to make sure it's working properly, check the inside of the home, whatever. Each company's different, so they may or may not allow that contract to convey as is. The buyer may have to start with a new contract. But if there isn't a maintenance agreement, the seller would want to provide to the buyer the fact that they've been maintaining that septic system. Okay, so that's a good thing. Septic inspection contingency. Inspection period. This contract is or is not contingent upon this inspection contingency. Dates after the ratification. Buyer at the buyer's expense and sole risk of damage to the property shall retain a Virginia licensed insured septic system installer, operator on site, soil evaluator, or professional engineer to inspect the private conventional septic system or private alternative sewage disposal system, which is called a septic inspection. Such septic inspection shall include a walkover visual inspection and probing of the drain field area to check for saturation for a conventional system, or a visual inspection of an alternative treatment unit for the alternative system. In addition, the following inspections will be conducted. Check all that apply. So you're working with your buyer. You're asking, do you want a pumping and inspection of all treatment tanks, including pump and recirculation tanks? So you're asking your buyer, do you want to pay for it to be pumped out and looked at? Okay. Excavation as necessary to visually inspect all distribution boxes if present, test all pumps and controls, and evaluate the function of the pumping and pressure dose disperse systems. So your client may want this. They may simply want a walkover inspection and a probe. They may be very familiar with septics themselves. It's not a big deal. Others want to know what the level in there when it was pumped out, especially if the party doesn't have a maintenance agreement. So they have no idea how full that septic system is. So if the certified inspection report indicates that there are any evidences of malfunction of the conventional system or alternative system, buyer shall deliver to the seller prior to the septic inspection deadline. Oh, sorry, guys. The buyer, the entire copy of the report and the buyer's remedies, just like with the other contingencies we have, or the entire copy of the report and the notice to void. If buyer fails to obtain a septic inspection, just like with everything else, and they don't void, then the time just passes and the contract remains in full force and effect. During the negotiation period, in the event that B1 above, the parties shall have so many days to negotiate. The buyers deliver the home inspection report to negotiate a mutually accepted written addendum addressing the deficiencies. So again, the buyer may have done the inspection, but they can ask the seller to remedy the deficiencies. If the seller refuses, the buyer can choose to move forward to remedy themselves. Now, there are some lenders that may require that the remedies be done prior to settlement. So if there is a deficiency, well or septic, and same with home inspection too, the seller has said no, the buyer has agreed to accept it the way it is and accept the deficiencies. Some lenders and some loan programs may require that those deficiencies be satisfied prior to settlement. So then that brings in another sort of an addendum between the parties, because the buyer is paying for someone to work on the seller's property, right, and paying the bill. So it can be done, but it's negotiation. You have to mutually work together to get it done, okay? Some companies will defer payment till settlement and some will not. You have to find out and double check. Okay? Any questions about well and septic? Do you think there's wells and septics here in Falls Church City? Absolutely. McLean, Fairfax, Vienna, they're all around us. You just never know. it's good to ask. There's a little parcel of land, grouping of housing out in Loudon that there's like 3 houses on this street, and everyone around them is on public. And this alternative system that was put there by the builder of this little group of 3 or 4 houses is in such a situation that in order for them to hook to public, and any which they go off their property, they have to cross someone else's property, which requires an easement. And everyone surrounding them has denied those easements. It's in the $30,000 and $40,000 and $50,000 for them to even try to work with the county to go along the road, even they were to go down the middle of the road to try and connect to public sewer. So these homes are kind of bound there, and one in particular is almost unsellable because of the way the system is set up. They cannot enlarge the system. So, so when you're representing a seller or a buyer and you're dealing with well and septic, I would encourage you to make sure inspections are done and they know everything, and never tell someone, oh, you can hook to public, it just costs you money. Sometimes it's just not available. And I know one of the owners of one of the properties there, his is worse than all the others. His home is virtually unsellable because of it. And it's livable and he can rent it. He just can't sell it because of the way the county, and there's been congressmen and all these people involved trying to figure out the situation out there. But it's just one of those just oddities. So just be really careful about that when talking to your client, and making sure that they take advantage of every inspection that's available. All right, let's go on to page 90. And this is our purchaser's acknowledgement of receipt of property owners association package, also known as the HOA package. This is different than a condo. So when you're representing a buyer and a seller, this document should come from the seller's agent, the listing agent, along with the HOA documents, okay? If that were so. There are just too many occasions where the listing agent shoots, they take an email coming from the HOA association and they just forward it on to the buyer's agent or whatever the contract says, and they do not include this document. And then they'll send the follow-up, just have your client sign a blank one. That's fine. It's not a disclosure. So the seller is not disclosing anything in here. It's just the buyer's acknowledgement. So what is the buyer acknowledging here? The purchaser. So the reference is made to the contract that was offered on buyer and seller property address. By my or our signatures on this document, I or we have acknowledged receipt from a seller of a disclosure packet that I or we have requested. Pursuant to the Virginia Property Owners Association Act and the Code of Virginia, 1950 as amended, the disclosure package we receive shall include. You guys need to know what it includes, because you could get a partial package and think it's the whole package, and it's not. Okay, and I'll tell you in a minute why. Okay, the name of the association, and if incorporated, the state in which the association is incorporated in, and the name and address of the registered agent in Virginia, a statement of any expenditures of funds approved by the association or the board of directors that shall require an assessment in addition to a regular assessment during the current year or the immediate succeeding fiscal year. So if there's been a ton of snow, the condo association, their funds may be low, they may assess everyone, say, an extra $10 for 6 months. It's called a special assessment to build their fund back up for snow removal. Okay? You, as a seller, have to disclose that to the buyer, that there's a special assessment. In MRIS, in Keystone, you put in there what the fees are on a monthly basis, a yearly basis, whatever it is that you choose the frequency. So if it's a monthly basis, you put $150 per month. And then there's a field for special assessments. So if there's a special assessment, you have to put that in there as well. Okay? That has to be notified to the buyer that there's a special assessment. A statement including the amount of the assessments and any other mandatory fees or charges currently imposed by the association, together with any cost post-closing fee charged by the common interest community manager, if any, and associated with the purchase. Your buyer may have to pay some money right up front on their settlement statement that goes to the association. It could be $50, it could be $100. It might be for the transfer of the parking passes. It could be for them setting up their account. There could be fees. So, but they have to be listed in the resale disclosure. And the title company is going to confirm all that with the association and provide that information to the buyer and seller. Okay? All right. A statement of whether there are any other entity or facility to which the lot owner may be liable for fees or any other charges. You have to pay for pool passes. I'm not sure if it's covering that one here or not. Sometimes if you want an extra parking spot, you know, the listing agent may have said you get 2 parking spots when in reality it's 1. But if you want an extra one, there might be a fee for that. You know, some associations do things like this, but it just has to be disclosed. They can do it. It just has to be disclosed. The current reserve status report or summary thereof, a statement of the status and the amount of the reserve or replacement fund and any portion of the fund allocated by the board of directors, a copy of the association's current budget or summary thereof prepared by the association, and a copy of its statement or income expenses and statement of the financial position, a balance sheet for the last fiscal year, for which such statement is available, including statements of the balance due of any outstanding loans of the association, a statement of the nature and status of any pending suit or unpaid judgment in which the association is a party to, that either could or would have a major material impact on the association or its members, or that relates to a lot being purchased. So someone may be suing the association for something. Thank you, Dennis. So if there's a lawsuit out there, you as a new purchaser needs to know that there is a lawsuit out there and what's it for. Will it affect me? Will it affect my financial picture once I move into this association? Will I be able to resell this in a couple of years from now? Okay. Let's see, a statement setting forth what insurance coverage is provided for all the lot members by the association, including the fidelity bond maintained by the association, and what additional insurance would normally be secured by each individual lot owner. A statement that any improved or alternative alterations made to the lot by the association, including the fidelity bond maintained by the association. I'm sorry, what sideways there. Users made to the lot or common area assigned thereto are or are not in violation of the declaration, bylaws, rules and regulations, architectural guidelines, architecture articles of incorporation, if any, of the association. A statement setting forth any restrictions, limitations, or prohibitions on the right of the lot owner to place a sign on the owner's lot advertising a lot for sale. Some places you can't even put a signpost out, or like that little sign there is prohibited. Okay, there are associations that will not allow signage. Keeping their area clean. And that also means political signs as well, and they will fine you. It's not, you have a right to vote for whomever you wish, but you don't have a right to stick the sign in your yard. Okay. A statement setting forth any restrictions, limitations, or prohibitions on the right of the lot owner to display any flag on the owner's lot, including but not limited to reasonable restrictions as to the size, place, manner, placement of display of such flag, and the installation of any flagpole or similar structures necessary to display such a flag. So just because we're in America and Virginia, some homeowners associations will not allow you to display those flags.
Other flags, sure. But the American
Well, they can prohibit you from having a flagpole, and they can prohibit you from putting something on your home that doesn't conform. So that's how they get around that, yes. But they can also prohibit you from putting, you see those metallic things that goes over mailboxes? They can prohibit you from putting decorative things on mailboxes. So all that could be in your HOA and condo packages. So if you have someone who likes to really lavishly decorate for the seasons outside their home or have certain color preferences, they need to be very careful when they review their documents. In Reston, for example, you have each cluster has color palettes that they're allowed to have their home be. But if you cannot have the same color that your neighbor on either side of you have, or the neighbor across the street, for example, in the cluster I lived in. So you could not have the same color outside of their home. You had to choose another color that was in the palette that was available for you to choose from. So they're very restrictive about that. And if it's the wrong color, one incident, a friend of mine went to the association secretary who printed off the color palette for him. He took it to Home Depot and had the color done. Her printer was missing one of its ink cartridges. Was it 3-story townhouse, wrong color? And his wife used to babysit my child. And when she was a baby and I pulled her from the house, and I looked at it, I'm like, that's the wrong color green. He goes, no, it's exactly. I'm like, no, I'm telling you, it's the wrong color green. Right, and exactly. And it's hard. That's why Pemmon Hills and North Springfield are so popular. Yeah. Yeah. No HOA. Yeah, when I lived in Pemmon Hills, it was okay when I would drive down the street and I'd see a pink house or a purple house. I'm like, I'm okay with that because there's no HOA. I may not particularly like it, but I'm okay with it. So paragraph 12, a statement setting forth restrictions, limitations, or prohibitions on the right of the owner unit to install or use solar energy collective devices on your homeowner. So you may not be able to go solar. It depends on what their regulations are. A copy of the current declaration, the association articles of incorporation, and bylaws, and any rules and regulations and architectural guidelines adopted by the association. A copy of any approved minutes of the board of directors and association meetings for the 6 calendar months preceding the request for the disclosure package. A copy of the notice given to the lot owner by the association of any current pending rule architectural violation. A copy of the fully completed one-page cover sheet developed by the Common Interest Community Board, and a certification that the association has filed the Common Interest Community Board annual report required, which certification shall indicate the filing number assigned by the Common Interest Board and the expiration date of such filing. A statement including any known project approvals currently in effect issued by secondary mortgage marketing agencies. So, a lot said. Be very careful. Reston and Alexandria, there's a couple areas where there's a master plan. Yeah, Lake Ridge. There's a master development plan. Reston itself is a master development plan. So there's a Reston association that has its own set of documents. Within Reston, there's little pocketed neighborhoods, condos, townhouses, single-family homes that have what they refer to as their cluster association. So as a listing agent representing a seller, the seller needs to order both sets of documents. The buyer has to be given both sets of documents. Oh, by the way, and I don't know about Lake Ridge and some of the others, but Reston Association will not allow the money to be deferred to closing. The cluster association may, and most cases do, but the Reston Association will not. Okay? So when you're looking online at a listing agreement, it might say HOA documents, $460 annually. And if it's a condo, it could say condo fees, $400 monthly. okay? Because they're in Reston, and there's the Reston Association, which is an HOA fee, property owner, and then there's the condo cluster. Or there could be HOA fees, and then it could be annual, and then the cluster. In that case, I would group it together annually, or you can divide by 12 and put it monthly, but you've got the Reston Association, which is an annual fee up front, okay? I bought a foreclosure in Reston in 1998, or 1997 rather, and the bank claimed total ignorance. And I got a small little package of cluster documents, which basically at that time said my house had to be brown, my fence had to be brown, and if I wanted to have a gate in the back, I could, but it had to be brown. and that was pretty much it. So I bought it in July, and on my settlement statement, there must have been some collection of some fee or the bank paid it. I'm not sure, because no one said anything to me about Reston Association. And then I got a bill for $450 right after Christmas that I had less than a month to pay, or they would start fining me. And Reston Association is very, very serious about it. So just be very careful. You know, make sure your client knows as a listing agent that your seller fully gives you everything. On your listing agreement, you have a place for all that. Who is your association? How much do you pay them? What is their phone number? Get all that up front, okay? So we'll stop there for today. On Thursday, what I would like to do Thursday, Rich is going to come in and talk a little bit on finances. I'll get those other two addenda to talk about. And between Thursday and Friday, I want to take us live out to MRIS and Keystone and kind of look on how to put a listing in, some tricks of the trade, so to speak, and then it's questions and answers, and then prepping us for Monday. So for those of you online, I would love to know if you are going to physically be here on Monday, because ideally we like to play roles. So I'd like to assign people roles to play for the mock settlement, having a listing agent, a buyer's agent, the two sellers, and the two buyers, okay? Because you're going to have, David and I are going to throw some monkey wrench into something that you're going to have to discuss and negotiate between agents, because there's going to be a problem that comes up, a challenge, if you will, at walkthrough. So the buyer agent needs to approach the listing agent and work with the seller to get it resolved. You may have to reach out to the lender to say, you know, what can we do here? Is there credit available? Or, you know, we're not going to go anything drastic like the HVAC system doesn't work, because that would stop settlement altogether, going through a walkthrough if it was a VA loan. But you know, something fun, so it helps you learn how to negotiate with one another and what your rights really are and what your buyers and sellers can do and what's acceptable at the table. Okay? So any questions? Thank you, guys.